Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now, your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 54 of the podcast. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the opposite of what we discussed last time. Last time we talked about what is the most horrible advice you ever got when it came to martial arts and self-defense. And this time I asked my Facebook group the opposite question, like what is the best martial arts or self-defense advice that you ever received? And I received a bunch of answers that were really good. And I'd like to go over them, well, not all of them because there were too many, but I'd like to go over a fair number of them and give a little bit of my own thoughts on them. So that's what I have in store for you today. But before we get going on that, as always, quick shout out to one of my patrons. That's Michael Austin. Michael became one of my patrons about half a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to thank Michael in particular for his support, because it's thanks to you, Mike, that I can do what I do. So appreciate it a lot. And I hope you enjoy everything that's on my Patreon so far, because there's a lot of unique content that is only there. So if you guys want to support the show, as always, go to wimsblog.com/donate, and that'll give you different ways of doing it. And you can become a patron, or you can do it differently. There's many options. It's just that's what keeps it going. And with things that are coming ahead, and I'll see if I can talk a little bit about that maybe in another episode. I've got a lot of plans, a lot of work that I want to do, and the support makes that possible. So that's what I wanted to say first. Next, all the show notes will be at wimsblog.com/54. So number 54. So I'm going to put a few of them with all the comments that I'm going to make about the feedback that I received on my question. Right, so that's what's coming up. Now, first, a little bit of an update. One of the reasons why I have been sorely lacking in creating a lot of content has been that I'm moving. Well, I have finished moving out of my apartment. I've moved into another place. And you can imagine in these pandemic times that it's kind of, not as easy as it normally would be. Normally, you just load everything in a van or in a big truck and you're out there. And yeah, that didn't work out all that great. So it took a lot more time than I wanted to, a lot of effort. But as of Monday this week, I moved out fully. I gave back the keys and I'm done. So living in a new place now, and has some advantages that I spend a little bit less time on the road than I used to, which is always great. So that means that I have a little bit more time to do stuff, whether it's writing or making podcasts and videos and so on, or just chilling out at home and just relaxing or training. So that's one of the main upsides. The downside is that I no longer have access to my garage that I had there, where I would train a lot with the heavy bag and the equipment. And also I had a pretty big open parking lot that was paved, and I could do a lot of outdoor training as well when the beautiful Belgian weather allowed it. So that's one of the things that I'll miss. But, and this is what I was just hinting at, I'm looking to rent a space over here where I live now, where I can kind of have a combination of a training room, an office that I can work and have all my administration, all that kind of stuff, but also use it as a recording studio, both for videos and for podcasts. So that's kind of the goal. Obviously, if I had thousands of euros to spare every month, it would be very easy to find something. Unfortunately, I'm not in that position, sadly. But so it's going to take a while, but I'd rather wait and look for something that is A, affordable, and B, exactly what I'm looking for, as opposed to renting some crappy place that is very limited, and that after like a few months I'm already just pulling my hair out, that because all of the problems that I run into, that I can't do what I want to do. So that's basically my big project that I am working on, and the purpose is that it would allow me to be a lot more consistent with creating all the content I do for you guys, the podcast, videos, writing, and so on, so that I just have an office to go to, get the work done, and then go home, which was never really possible beforehand for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go into now. But I think that's going to be a really, a better use of my time, a lot more effective. And obviously for you guys, the upside is that you're going to have a lot more content coming your way. So, and again, if you want to help out with that, you can donate, you can support me. Again, wimsblog.com/donate, go there. I recommend the Patreon because there's so much content there. We're coming up to 4 years of content. That's, dozens and dozens of hours of video and articles and a bunch more stuff like bonus podcast episodes. So there's a lot there. And that helps a lot, obviously, with making sure that, the financial side is covered for all the time and effort that I put into this stuff. So if you want to help out, that's a large part of the budget of the Patreon will eventually go to making sure I can rent out some space. So looking forward to that. And again, it's going to take a while, but I'll keep you guys up to speed if and when it happens. But then you know what I'm focusing on right now. Okay, that said, so yesterday I posted in my Facebook group, and again I'll put a link in the show notes, and I asked the guys a question which was, like I said, the opposite of episode 53, and this time I asked, what is the best martial arts or self-defense advice you ever received? I got a truckload of answers, so for that, shout out to all the members of my Facebook groups. You guys are awesome. I'm going to give you mine at the end, but I'll start with basically what a lot of people said, and I'm going to quote Scott here, and he said, "Run away. If there is violence or the threat of violence around you, the best self-defense tactic is to get away as quickly as possible. Leave your ego on the pavement behind you." It's a really good way of putting it, Scott. And a lot of people said something similar to this. And it was basically like, if you can avoid it to begin with, just get out of there. Don't engage. Just leave. Get out of there. Run. Whether you run fiercely at the last second before it goes bad, or whether you can spot the trouble before it actually spots you and you leave so you don't have to run. These are two opposite ends of the scale. It doesn't matter. Get out of there. I like to think that in 2020, this kind of advice has kind of trickled through to the martial arts community, but unfortunately, there's still a lot of guys who think that it's all about fighting and being a badass. If you guys remember, guys like Peyton Quinn, Mark McYoung, and so on were, in a few decades ago, the guys who were very much writing about this and making videos about this, about all the aspects of self-defense that were not the physical techniques. And then we get to the avoidance part and awareness and so on. And now a lot of people take that for granted, but it wasn't always the case. I was there, I remember. And that is something that I think is more, in the public awareness, but still not enough. Still too many young guys, especially, that think that, some guy disses you, so you have to stand up to him and you have to kick his ass. No, you don't. There's a video I saw just recently, and I think it was in New York, but I could be wrong. And it's security camera footage of some sort of supermarket or a store. There's a guy standing in the entrance. And he's standing in the middle of the entrance. It's relatively narrow. He's on his phone. I think he's being an asshole just for doing that. It's an entrance. Move out of the way, or step off to the side, get in or get out, but don't stand there blocking everything. So it's kind of an asshole move. Another guy comes in and he decides that he doesn't want to go around him, so he kind of bumps him in the shoulder as he moves past him. He could have gotten around them. He didn't. He chose not to. So now we've got two assholes on the scene. And what happens is that they start fighting, obviously. And then they end up outside. So there's a little bit of a cut in the action. and the guy who was fiddling with his phone in the middle of the thing, he ends up pulling a gun and shoots the other guy. So replay that whole scene in your mind here. You go to the store, there's a guy being obnoxious and kind of blocking everybody so they can get in easily. So you can choose to bump him in the shoulder and kind of prove what a tough guy you are and show him the error of his ways. You can do that. But this is a case in which that ends up with you being dead. Was that worth it? So, and this will come back in a little bit when we talk about some of the other advice people responded with. But if you can get out of there, I mean, get out of there. If at any point you end up in a situation where it comes to blows, leave, get out of there. You've got nothing to prove. There are obviously situations in which that you can't leave. For instance, you're with your children, you're with your wife, a variety of other reasons. So that is all well and true. But I think it's fair to say that in the vast majority of the cases, you have the option to leave, but we are mentally not wired to do that. We are mentally wired, especially us guys, to, beat on our chest and huff and puff and show the other guy that we're not backing down and that we are actually real tough guys, and we're going to show him just how much that's true and how much he isn't. And then you end up fighting a guy and everything that comes from that. Now, the reason why it's so important to focus on getting out of there is that, and I just wrote about that a little while ago somewhere, and I said, look, death is always on one of the options when it comes to blows. When violence starts, you know where it starts, you know who throws the first blow, you know who's instigating and so on. But once people are actually punching and kicking and so on, you have no idea where it's going to stop. It could be one punch that knocks the guy out and he just falls into a heap and it kind of collapses and he's knocked out and he wakes up and he's fine. Or you can hit with the same punch and he goes stiff as a board and he falls over backwards, smacks the back of his skull into the concrete and he bleeds out. Or he has a subdural hematoma and his brain swells up and he dies. Both extremes can happen. Or it could be that you end up in a big fight and you're fine. You think you're just kicking the other guy's ass. You're doing A-okay. And then without you knowing it, he just pulled a knife because he feels he's losing and he stabs you a few times. And it's not always like in the movies. Sometimes you feel it, sometimes you don't. You might not feel it. And I've seen cases in which that a guy he got attacked and he fights off his opponent actually quite well. Does a beautiful sweep and punches and so on. But he'd been stabbed. And in a matter of about 30 seconds, it could have been a little bit longer, but not much, he drops down and he's dead. He bled out. So that is another aspect of it, is that just because you're beating some guy up doesn't mean that you're safe. Again, death is always one of the options for both of you, or for everybody involved, I should say. So if you can get out of there, get out of there. Right, moving on. Next one. Aldo said, one of the most useful skills in every aspect of life is being in control of our emotions. And that is something that you learn from the martial arts. And I agree with that up to a certain point. Kind of depends on where you train. Because I've been to gyms and schools where they kind of trained hardcore and they were into hurting people and being assholes. So those guys exist too. On the whole, I think most martial arts schools and self-defense classes are pretty good on that front. But if you end up in one of those bad places, again, get out of there, leave. And if you're in a good place, it is indeed a very useful skill to handle your emotions. One of the ways we do that in martial arts training is there's somebody punching at your head at high speed, and your amygdala is going to go nuts and say freak out and fight back or run away or freeze and so on. And you might get a lot of emotional, energy flowing through your mind, like holy crap, what's going on? And if you're not in control of that, it controls you. And for people who've been training for a while, this kind of thing is usually, not that much of a thing anymore because you're used to it. But remember the first classes, or the first time you had that, first time somebody, in class came at you really hard with an attack, or you're sparring the first time and they're coming at you and they're nailing you with heavy shots and it hurts. If you're not used to that, it's easy to crumble, or it's easy to get out of control. So learning to handle those extreme situations is obviously important for self-defense, but also to use as a step up towards handling all of your emotions, learning to control them. I've said it many times before. I have a temper. Well, I used to have a temper as a kid, and it was pretty bad. And one of the ways in which I was able to channel it was through martial arts. Now, I still have that temper. It's still there, and it still tries to trip me up. But I've gotten better at controlling it because I didn't want to give into it, because I knew that eventually that would end up with me in a very bad place, or worse. So I focused on that and learned to control it more. And again, I still fail. Every now and then it still really trips me up and my temper takes over. Fortunately, nobody gets hurt, at least for a very long time. That hasn't happened. So the point is that the training can help you on that front as well. And it is a critical skill that is just a life skill, is be an adult. Being an adult means controlling your emotions, not giving in to them constantly. That's what children do. And we forgive them because they're children. But if you're an adult, you're supposed to be able to handle yourself. And with that in mind, I think the training in martial arts is really, really helpful. All right, next. So Paul and Johnny said the same thing basically. And the best advice they got was stay away from stupid people in stupid places doing stupid stuff. I could not agree more. Now, this kind of falls into the area where we talk about kinds of violence. And there is such a thing as random violence, where you're just walking down the street, minding your own business, and this guy comes up out of nowhere and punches you in the head and runs away. And he's not even trying to rob you. He's just this asshole guy, or he might be mentally ill, or for whatever reason, that's his thing. And you're just the unlucky guy to be on the receiving end of that. Well, that happens. And there's no denying it. It happens. However, what happens far, far more is that you end up being the victim of criminal violence. Somebody tries to rob you and so on. Or you end up being in a situation that turns violent. And then we're talking more about intraspecies or social violence, where it's actually because of an interaction you have with somebody, or people are drunk, or they're high, and so on. And you end up in a situation where a bunch of people are in that state of mind or inebriated, and that's where they are, and you're there too, and things escalate, and all of a sudden you're fighting. The best defense against that is staying away from it. Now, in my opinion, a lot of the violence falls into that category where it's just a bunch of people doing stupid things. If you think about it, you'll see that I think that's true. So if you just stay away from that, well, you're fine. They can't get you if you're not there. There will be plenty of other stupid people doing stupid things in those places, but you're not going to be one of them. So if you can avoid that, your life tends to be so much easier because simply you're not there. The other aspect of that is do that a few times. Go to those places, doing stupid stuff with those people. Eventually, you'll run into the kind of trouble you don't want. And that could mean anything from law enforcement getting involved, you getting a rap sheet, you having to pay fines for hurting and injuring other people or breaking stuff, or you ending up yourself pretty damaged and messed up. And on the other hand, you might even end up dead. So stay away from those places. Usually there's nothing there that you don't want to, there's nothing there that you actually really need. unless you're into certain lifestyles, but we're not going to talk about that today. So if you can stay away from that, just do it. It's the easiest solution. It's the safest solution. And it usually, again, unless you have a really different lifestyle, you don't have to be there. Okay, moving on. So this one is from Lex, and Lex says, don't be an asshole. And I think it was from Mark McYoung. I think so too. I think Mark has talked about that a fair bit. I have a little bit of a variation on that one, and it's in an older article of mine on my blog. It's one of the most popular ones still today. I wrote it about 7 years ago, and that one's called 8 Self-Defense Tips for Men. And I'm actually still writing the book about that one, which is an expansion. And so far I've got 12 self-defense tips. So anyway, that is one of the book projects I have still going. But number 5 of that list of tips is get over yourself. And that is pretty much the same thing as don't be an asshole. And then again, we get to the part where it is more or less social violence, where people are fighting and getting into trouble over stuff like, you bumped into me, you spilled my beer, you're looking at my girl, you're this, you're that. People getting into the kind of fights that are easily avoidable or that are not criminal in nature. It's not about somebody trying to, rob you and get your wallet. It's none of that stuff. It's simply people being assholes. And we like to think that we are always awesome and everybody else is an asshole, but there's a really funny website right now, and it's I forget the URL. It could be that just what I'm going to say, but it's basically, am I the asshole? And there, it's kind of a form. You describe a situation, and it ends up with you saying like, okay, this is what I said, and this is what the other person said or did or whatever. And then you ask, am I the asshole? And then a lot of people respond. It's quite a lot of fun to read that. So check that out if you can. My point is this: if you are in a situation in which somebody's being an asshole, being one yourself doesn't really help in any way. I mean, it's only going to make things worse. It's only going to escalate things. And obviously, eventually, when it gets to violence, because he's being an asshole and you respond in kind, well, yeah, then there's no other way to solve this except with either somebody backing down. But if you're both big enough of an asshole, you won't. So then you end up fighting. And again, death is always one of the options. That's the end point of violence. You never know how far, if it's going to get there. Usually it doesn't, but it can. So, and that is what I meant with get over yourself, is that if somebody's being an asshole to you, don't respond in kind. The best solution to that I find is try to be a professional. And in my article, 8 Self-Defense Tips for Men, and again, it's going to be in the show notes, the link, I mentioned the last tip is basically stick to the mission. You need to have a mission, a personal mission. And for me, that's very easy. Every day when I walk out the door, my mission is to come back safe and sound to my loved ones and live an awesome life. Anything that goes against that is not the mission. So I have to stay clear of that. That's it. It seems simple, but if you have that as a mission, it makes everything easier. It's, do I really have to get upset over this guy honking at me in traffic? No. I'm like, okay, you're an asshole, but that doesn't mean that I have to be, the same thing. Now, I do enjoy smiling at the guy, and when he's past, ranting and raving and calling him all sorts of names to get rid of the stress a little bit. My kids are well aware of that, and that's perfectly fine. But do it after he's gone, instead of flipping the bird in his face. Do it, underneath the dashboard where he can't see, if you really have to do it. But responding in kind is one of the best ways to ensure that you end up in a violent situation. So get over yourself and avoid the problem. Next up, and this one's from Jerry, and he talks about what he learned from his teacher and said, rule number 1, don't get hit. I couldn't agree more. Now, Jerry's a friend of mine. We've talked about this for years on end and discussed things in a very heated fashion sometimes. Not as much now, but more at the beginning. We get along great. Don't worry, guys. Now, don't get hit is in my opinion, something that distinguishes good martial arts and self-defense systems from combat sports. In combat sports, you assume that you're going to get hit. It's just that this is going to happen. There's pretty much no way of escaping this. Whether it's Muay Thai, MMA, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're going to get hit. Now, there's a context, there's an environment, there's a referee, you're a trained fighter, you know who you're fighting, you're prepared, blah, 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 all those kind of things. That is very different in a self-defense situation, in which it will not be something you planned unless you're living an interesting life, but then you have to question your motives. And you are usually not fighting somebody who's your weight class, your size, your experience level, and so on. If you are even fighting one person at all, could be a bunch of guys, could be one guy in front of you and the other guy clobbers you over the head from behind and you're done fighting already. So, and obviously, there's weapons involved or potentially. And once again, the previous example that I gave is that you might feel somebody punching you, but he could have actually just have stabbed you and you just haven't registered yet. The only thing you feel is the impact of the punch, but it's only a few seconds later that you realize that you're actually bleeding. And I had one of my students have that, and he was walking home after a party, and this guy that he kind of knew but not really was bothering him and following him. I was like, dude, leave me alone, leave me alone. And he pushed him back, and the guy just punched him in the stomach. Turned out that he was holding a knife. Fortunately, it wasn't a big one. And my student felt that, holy crap, I'm bleeding. He went to the hospital, and they told him, like, look, guy, you're really lucky. Half an inch deeper, and he would have punctured your liver, and you would have been dead. Because we know where you're coming from. You wouldn't have made it in time, too far from the hospital. So not getting hit is really important when you are outside of a combat sport context. It is also so in a combat sport context, but people can ignore that rule a lot more because of, again, the context, the rules, and so on. Whereas outside of that context, if it's pure self-defense, assume that the guy's armed, assume that he's stronger, assume that you cannot take those hits. Because in many cases, guys who fight look for victims that won't give them a lot of opposition, but they look for weaker, smaller victims and so on. Just like if you're a 100-pound woman and there's this 250-pound guy in front of you getting upset and angry at you, yeah, he can take a few of your punches probably, but vice versa, not so much. So not getting hit all of a sudden becomes a huge deal for you. And again, this is an extreme example, but it sure exists. So focusing on defense before, during, and after your technique, making sure that you don't get hit is such a critical piece of the puzzle that we can't emphasize enough. Right, next one. And this one is from Douglas. And he said, when it comes to fighting, always be in the position of advantage, and it's never the other guy's turn. And I agree with that. And it's never the other guy's turn is something that I stole from one of my friends, called it Monty's Law. And again, I wrote an article about that with a lot more detail, and I'll refer to that. Again, links in the show notes. But basically, Monty's a law enforcement friend of mine, and that is one of the things he used to say. It's like, it's never the other guy's turn. It's always my turn. He doesn't get a turn. So if you work from that perspective, that is again radically different from a combat sports perspective. Now, Monty explained it a little bit differently than the way I use it, but I coined it Monty's Law, so I can interpret it any way I like. But anyway, I'm just giving him crap. Don't worry, guys. But the thing is that if you're in a combat sport mindset, you accept the give and take. You accept that you will eat some punches and then you deal out some punches, but you accept that there's going to be an exchange. And in some cases, it's like, people just wait for the other guy to finish so they can fight back. And we see this very much in a lot of the more modern, kickboxing style fighting that we see, like the glory fights that we used to see and so on. Those kind of tournaments, where in stark contrast to primarily the Dutch style kickboxing and Muay Thai that we would see in the 80s and 90s and so on, which was, in my opinion, a lot more technical and very different tactically speaking. What we now see is a lot of guys just standing in front of each other with a closed guard, waiting for the other guy to finish, and then it's their turn to throw a power shot or a combination. And then the guy fires back and they close up their guard again, wait until it's over, and then it's their turn again. Again, the idea of taking turns should be completely alien to you when it comes to self-defense. Because again, you cannot take damage. You can't take turns, because if you take damage, it can be the end of the fight. In many cases, the first guy to land a technique is going to be able to capitalize on that result, to land following techniques, and the guy on the receiving end doesn't get a turn anymore. And that is the mindset that Monty was talking about, is that you want to make sure it's always your turn. He doesn't get into the fight. So what Douglas said is that if you can be in a position of advantage, then by default, it's going to be hard for the other guy to get a turn, and it will eventually always be your turn. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's a lot of training involved, a lot of thinking really hard about how and why and so on, which is far beyond the scope of this episode. But try to incorporate that in your training. I think it's one of the best ideas possible. Right, so one more, this is the last one, and this is mine. Now, I've already talked about Randy's Law, which I'll put a link in the show notes again, because that was such a huge deal for me many years ago, and that set me in a different path in my training and in my studies. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about something that is similar, and it's in combination with Randy's Law that I made a lot of progress, and that's why I think it's really good advice. And this is from, it must be about 15 years ago, maybe longer, I'm not sure. I think longer, but I'm not sure. And this was in a martial arts magazine. A Chinese teacher who practiced 9 or 10 different styles. He got a question from the reporter, and it was, how can you keep all that apart? How can you keep up? How can you remember all those things? I mean, 9 styles, that's so much information. And that was the gist of the question. And the teacher replied with, don't learn the same thing twice. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because what it meant is that sidetrack, at the time I was already training in different martial arts, so it was very relevant to my situation. And when he said don't learn the same thing twice, that is something that struck me as, yes, that this is fundamental. If you can avoid learning the same thing twice, then you will learn faster and you will remember it easier. And that brings us very close to Randy's Law, which is the differences are just as important as the similarities. For me, it was about compare and contrast, which is, if you write essays, compare and contrast essays is something that's kind of like a standard you often have to do. So it's pretty much the same thing. If you're learning 2 different styles, see what is already there that you know, and then see what is different, so that you don't have to learn the things you already know again, so you don't lose that training time. Instead, you try to look, okay, this is the same thing. We generate power the same way, or this is the same kind of punch. However, in style A, they do it this way for these and these reasons. And in style B, they do it for other reasons a little bit differently. Right. Look for the commonalities, but also look for the differences. And that means that the commonalities, then you understand that, well, in the technique, I just do it the same way, but just change this point here. turn your fist over a different way, or rotate your hips a little bit further than you normally would for a throw, and blah, blah, blah. Could be many things, but don't learn the same thing twice. And if you can do that, you will make a lot more progress very, very rapidly, because it's a paradigm shift. It's a different way of thinking about learning and training and so on. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. I am trying to stick to the 30-minute format, a little bit over 35 minutes. So I think that's pretty good. As always, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. If you would like to like, share, subscribe, join me on social media and so on, again, go to the donate page. That will be awesome. Show notes will be at wimsblog.com/54, like I said. For the future, I'm going to look for a few more guests to interview. Again, with all the moving that I was doing, it was difficult to plan. And it might be difficult now. This is early December as I record this, so with the holidays coming up, might be difficult to plan. But I'm going to give it a try, so that hopefully by next episode I can give you guys another guest to listen to. I've been asked to be interviewed as well for a different podcast, and with a little bit of luck, by the next episode I can send you that link. We'll see. So if you have ideas, suggestions for topics and things to discuss on the podcast, that'd be awesome. Just send me that in. Best way to reach me, just go to my Facebook page. Again, links in the show notes, but just go there. Don't hit me up on Instagram, please. I hate that. Because I think Instagram, the app is just crappy for messaging. So it annoys the hell out of me. So my Facebook page is just easier. All right, that's it, guys. Thank you very much. Hope you guys are staying safe and healthy, and I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.